Welcome back to Moose Track Studio. If you remember from last time, our top priority was to make some progress on the floor plan for the studio and the control room. And to do that, we needed to do some research into some sound isolation materials and techniques. So what did we find out? This product looks like it'll do exactly what we need. It'll isolate the walls without having to build a secondary wall. It's much thinner. The technical specs are pretty good about it, and it is easy to install. It's not going to cost us a whole lot to do it, much less than building a second wall, and that's what I thought we were going to have to do to start with. I couldn't find anywhere where it told me how much thickness I should use to account for the additional tracks, so they said call them, so I did.
Soundproof Cal, this is Justin. May I help you?
Hi, my name is Mark Good, and I'm interested in using your IsoTrax materials for a project that I'm doing, but I have a technical question. I'm looking at installing it on a ceiling, and in order to drop the fire suppression sprinkler head the proper distance, I need to know how much lower my sheetrock will be using the IsoTrax than without it.
So the IsoTrax will be an inch and a half off the joist, plus the thickness of drywall.
An inch and a half off the joist? Okay,
Correct.
That answers my question. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So the first thing that we need to do to our floor plan sketch is the back wall. The specs for all of the IsoTrax materials is for 5/8 inch sheetrock, and we had put in 3/8 inch. We need to do this mostly just for consistency's sake. There's rock behind this wall, so IsoTrax doesn't need to be put on this wall, but it might be a good thing to just keep everything consistent. So that's what we start with. Move that out to 5/8 inch. Now we need to do the same thing to the wall that faces outside. We need to make everything consistent in the width of the sheetrock. I think that'll be easier to get constructed. Originally, I was not going to include IsoTrax in the outside wall, but after listening to helicopters fly over all day and thunderstorms and that sort of thing, I don't think that we can do without it. So let's add that to the outside wall. The first problem that we notice is that we have the sheetrock and the IsoTrax reversed. Right now the sheetrock is against the studs and the IsoTrax is against the sheetrock. We need to reverse that. And so the easiest way to reverse that is simply to move the line that's between the two out so that the 1.5 inches on the wall side and the 5/8 inches on the inside of the room. So we grab that square and we elongate it to 1.5 inch, and then we measure our other, which should be 5/8 of an inch, and indeed it is. So the next thing that we need to work on is the wall that's in the next to the garage, the back wall where the speakers would be and the projection screen would be and that sort of thing. But there's a beam, if you remember. So we need to place the beam in the proper location, and it's 5 3/4 by 2 1/4. And we need to make sure it's the correct distance from the wall. So we put a marker down for that, and then we'll move the beam back and forth until we get it in the right place. Now it's important because the beam is thicker than the actual IsoTrax, and so we're going to have to deal with moving the sheetrock out an additional amount. We have to clear 2 1/4 inches, and we don't want the sheetrock touching the beam because that would be an acoustical coupling and transmit noise through the beam. So there's our 5 3/4 inch for the spot, and it's 17 inches from the wall, and that's where we'll leave it for now. We'll keep working on that, but more fun is to be had in the studio. We have a new bass track that we have to put in to our existing real country song. So let's go in and import a new bass track. We select that from the bass track that we got in an email, and we put it into our phone. We send it over to convert. Once we get it converted, we have to give it an appropriate, we put it in the right place, and then we give it an appropriate name. And before you know it, we have a new bass track. Of course, it hasn't been mixed yet, and it's a little bit loud so that we can hear it above all the other tracks. Once we got the bass added, we also need to add in a couple of pluck guitar tracks, pluck 1 and pluck 2. So we convert them and we put them into the project as we are. And then the next thing that we need to do is match up the old pluck guitars effects with the new pluck guitars, because we kind of like the effects, at least as a starting point. So we go in and we add some plug-ins for both the reverb right there and select that, and then we have to match the settings between the two. You can save the settings and then restore them, but a lot of times it's just as fast to bounce back and forth depending on how much you've actually changed. So we set the preset to the same preset, and then we have just a couple of things that we have to adjust in between them. In this particular plugin, there's also a sub selection, and we want to have a medium plate out of the studio time group. And so we select that, and that should make pretty much everything match except for the mix. And we go over and adjust the mix so that it comes down to the old setting a little bit more. And that's all we have to do to match that. Then the next thing that we need to do is bring in the channel strip, which is a dynamic range processor and compressor. It also has some other functions like EQ and gate, but we're mostly interested right now in its compression. The process for this is much the same as it was for setting up the reverb channel. We first bring in the plug-in for channel strip, and then we set up the dynamic range and compression to be approximately the same as we had on the previous channel. The volume for the pluck guitars that we just added is way too hot, so we need to bring them down, and we also need to try to pan them a little bit. In this case, we want a fairly hard pan on the two pluck guitars. They're used as a background fill instrument, and so that's what we're doing here. One of the tracks that we added, the color guitar track, plays in two different spots inside the piece. And so one of them is really loud relative to the other one, and we'd also like to have different processing on the two pieces. So one of the ways we can do this is duplicate the track, which we just did, and then go in and have on one track just the first piece, and on the other track just the second piece. So we go in with the on the first track, and we're going to trim off everything except the first time the instrument plays. So we go in to the first track, we select it, that's the piece that we want to keep, and so we're going to take it out of the second track and up to the second time that it plays. And then on the first track, we only want the first time that it plays. So we go grab the end of that and trim off everything after the fact. And that way we have separate control over each of the times that the color guitar is played in the piece. Then we can go back to our mix screen and change the volume on just the color guitar relative to each other. We can work on the processing a little bit later. Well, we didn't really add anything to the studio or any software or anything like that. But what we did do is change our task list a bit. I'd say we definitely started the drums for Real Country Songs, so we can check that one off the list. But we need to add one more. Barry Babb, our producer and composer for Real Country Song, will be here in a couple of weeks. And so we have to make a shopping list for Sweetwater so that we can solve some of the problems that we ran into last time when we tried to lay vocal tracks down. So I hope you'll join us next time on Moose Tracks Studio.